Frank was unhappy and was looking for another editor. And I was very close to the writer, one of the writers, Dave Humphreys. And I met Frank. I was cutting commercials. I met Frank and we got on. And so one of those days when it was very difficult to fire people in those days. It was very unionised. And so I said, look, to the producers, give me 2 weeks and see how it goes, and either fire me or keep me on. And luckily they kept me on, it worked. So it was my first feature, so it was very exciting. It's what I've been doing. 10 years I've been cutting commercials, and I thought, this isn't why I'm doing it, why am I doing it? And so it was very exciting to get it. Well, the politics were very strange because there was a sound editor who had already been hired on it, and he thought that when they got rid of the first editor, he was going to be the editor. And so he made my life a misery, but it's one of those wonderful learning curves, I came in rather innocently, and I learned a hell of a lot from him. But it was exciting. Frank is quite an easy director to work with, where he doesn't spend a lot of time in the cutting room. He talks to you about it. You do what you want, you show it to him, you talk about it again, and it works like that. There's none of that sitting next to you saying, can you move that 3 frames? It's quite popular these days. Oh yes, it was so exciting, and also what I felt was I knew how to edit because I've been doing it for a long time, but the whole scale of it, storytelling on that scale of 2 hours, and what they call workflow, how they do it. For instance, something I wasn't aware of until I worked on a film was that in those days they used to make black and white prints of the cut because they were cheap for all the sound editors. And so if you altered the picture, if you recut a reel, then theirs all had to be recut. And if you didn't tell them about it, you get in the mixing theatre, for instance, nothing fitted. So it's all that side of it that That was what I was really bothered about more than anything else, the workflow, how you did it. Not the cutting of film, because I think I've been doing it long enough to know pretty well what I was doing. Putting the end on the front, the very last, the very opening scene, which is tied to the end, that was Frank. That was an idea of Frank. Because it just needed the ambiguity of the end. I think it sort of ties it up nicely. It was a Frank idea because, in fact, the basic start was them all riding their bikes, which was the title sequence, which was always planned like that. It was pretty straightforward, pretty much the script. It's much more. If you're cutting a feature, it's much more about making the dialogue work than anything else. Which is also different. If you're cutting commercials, you're just making pretty pictures that are fast and da-da-da. But suddenly that's the thing you're also very doubtful about. The actual relationships of people in the film. That's the important thing, more important than anything else. The Who were wonderful about it. They gave me the tracks, and we were allowed to get away with a lot of things. Out of My Mind on the 515. We moved the verses around, and I was very apprehensive, and they were fine because it worked better for the story. But I think there were a couple of times where I wanted to get out of a song at a particular point, and they felt there was a more musical way to do it. But they were remarkably easy. They gave me the tracks, and they gave me, for instance, when we're in the dance hall and you're using it as source music, they gave me stereo because Dolby was only stereo then, there was no surround. And on the middle they gave me echo, so they'd recorded it in a corridor, a concrete corridor, so that you could feed that in as you wanted it. It was all presented to me. They were very efficient like that. John Entwistle was the most involved in the editing stage. And he was fine about things. As I say, there were a couple of times when he picked me up on things. There was a particular ending I wanted when they've all been arrested. And they're in the back of the police van, and there's Sting, and Sting offers him a cigarette. And he likes it. And I wanted a particular ending there. I think there was a little bit of difficulty there, but generally they were they sort of went along with it. As I said, swapping the verses was the thing. I was really apprehensive that they would say, "What the hell are you doing?" And they said, "Fine, it works." He's I think, I used to work with him and another director called Richard Markham, and both of them feel that if they've cast you properly, that they expect you to do your job well. And, I've done 4 or 5 films with Frank, and so one has a relationship about what, and also I think, it's very difficult to define this, but I think my work's better when I work with particular directors. And other directors, some directors I know what they want. I know what they're after in the film. And some directors I don't. I see the material and I'm really not sure. Frank, we were of a common mind, I think. We both wanted the same thing. Oh yes, I loved it. It was also, as I say, one of the things, it was one of the first stereo movies. It was just such a fantastic thing. When they first came out, 70mm ones and things, they used to move people's dialogue about. And Star Wars, they're still quite keen on this, and I hate it. You have dialogue on the front. I think there's only one shot we pan it. The rest of it is just spread. It's just a nice round feel of it. I think it's a coming of age thing, isn't it? It's about teenage angst. I think every generation, there's a moment in it where everybody feels like that sort of frustration. And I think Frank would say he still feels like that. It's something, it just touches you in a moment, that desperation. And particularly when you're doing something that you're really not very interested in, and a life you're not really leading the life you want, and you're, say, late teenage. I think it pays off all the time to each generation.